Hello, everybody. Welcome to Saturday. And as always, like we always say, it's always been a big week, but welcome to Saturday. I'm in Melbourne. The sun is shining, so hopefully it's going to be a really nice spring day and the weather's becoming beautiful. So hello and welcome. So firstly, I'm going to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from where I sit today and from wherever you're either tuning in from or whether you're going to watch later. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So thank you. So today we will be talking about induction and why induction is really important in family daycare from a service delivery perspective, but also predominantly why it's really important for you as family daycare educators to be inducted and to know what an induction should look like and to know whether or not you've been adequately inducted, particularly if you're new to the sector. So this will be all good information for your safety, your professional practice, all those sorts of things. So I'm Jodie Signorino. I started JPS Family Daycare Advisors a number of years ago now, 2014, I think. And this channel has grown as I've grown, and we've got a lot more new videos these days. And those of you that have followed me for a while know that I do struggle sometimes with technical ability. So there is always, even yesterday's newsletter had a little whoops in it. So yeah, so it is what it is. But this channel is designed for family daycare educators, just to make sure that you've got access to as much free content as you can, that this will guide your self-directed learning. So the purpose is really to make sure that you've got all the information you need to make sure that you're safe and to make sure that your home business is a viable business and it's enjoyable for you. So we want to take off some of those pressures and those sorts of things. However, as a governance advisor, it does come down to processes and systems to make sure that everybody's safe. Now, if you did read my newsletter yesterday, you would know that I have been speaking about a service in particular that is dealing with a fairly serious non-compliance, and I've also got some other examples to back up some of what I'm telling you today. So with the service that I became involved with this week, there was a child left home in the home alone, and thankfully the child was fine and there was no injuries. However, we know that that is a massive breach of the education and care legislation, and there's an investigation that's taking part as we speak, and we don't know all the details yet. We're not sure what happened, but one of the things when I become involved, particularly at an incident level, is that we review what went wrong, why did this happen, what happened, where is it? So with our initial findings on this, we do always look at to determine where our starting point is for the service's sake initially, where that gap lies, what happened, how did this go wrong? So one of the first processes and systems we do look at this point is the induction, the registration, the recruitment even. So we look at that first. How did this happen? Why did this educator, why was this educator registered? Did this educator not know? What went wrong? So in unpacking the induction, it got me to thinking, well, this is often where our induction is really what sets the standard for what we should be doing in the long run and how we the expectation is for all of us in any job, but as a family daycare educator, what is the expectation, what is the requirements, and on and on. So it goes on. So I know many family daycare educators have what I would consider an introduction and not necessarily an induction, if that makes any sense. So an introduction is, and I know many of you have faced this, you meet with the service provider, you're handed a whole bunch of policies, you give your qualifications and your credentials, your qualifications, your certificate or your diploma or your bachelor, and your credentials, like your first aid certificate, you're working with children screening, those sorts of things. So there's that process in the beginning. And then there is the home safety assessment, and then you're often registered. Services that have a sound induction process. Now, if you want to think, I always think of induction like a program. So what is that program that you need everybody to learn? What is the learning? What is the awareness? What is that? And how long will that take? It varies for everybody, and each of you may be different. You may have signed contracts with an approved provider that says your induction period, your your probation period is 3 months. Some of you have 6 months, some of you may have longer. But generally speaking, we seem to be sitting around that 3-month mark where everything that the educator needs to know, to be aware of, what to do, what forms to fill in, why they need to fill them in, that can take up to 3 months. Now, if we go back and think about this particular incident with the child being left home, and we're reviewing the induction program, in this particular circumstance, the educator really only had an induction. There was no an introduction, there was no induction. And that's two very different things. So part of the induction would have seen the introduction take place. Yes, that is part of the induction. So that would have taken place with the educator, and then there would have been that learning program that went for a period of a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever that is. And then that would have supported that educator. Part of an induction program is to make sure that everything is covered off, so you might touch on particular policies. Depending on the educator, you may develop a particular induction program that includes 1 or 2 different things, and it does for sort of everybody else. But an induction program means that you can prove, and often this is where it's re-engineered in a sense. Often it's when things go wrong, like things have gone wrong this week, and I've got as I said, I've got 2 big examples for you this week. When things go wrong, that we go back on the induction program and we realise that the educator was potentially put in a bad position and didn't know their obligations under the legislation. So that's one of the reasons why we do go back on induction. The other one that I had come through this week, which is a non-compliance to an approved provider, they visited 22 educators and went through a whole range of things with each educator, and the findings were that the approved provider hadn't put every reasonable precaution in place to protect children from harm and hazards. Now, I say all the time, if educators aren't safe and protected, then how can we expect children to be safe and protected? So when the regulatory officer, because in the reports we do get some snippets of the transcripts of what the conversations have taken place between the regulatory authority and the educators. And when I read that report, I was like, oh, those poor people, like they obviously weren't ready for the role. They didn't know the expectations. They weren't given all of the information. So therefore, those educators are really at risk. So if you're not sure, and if you have experienced an introduction and not an induction, that's one of the reasons why I have this channel, is you can go back over and have a look at what are the governance arrangements for family daycare. What are your responsibilities in family daycare? What are some of the strategies you can implement to make sure that you're safe? Because we'll find now with both of these incidents that have happened and the investigation that will take place by the regulatory authority, and I'm sitting beside the service providers and helping them with their improvement plans and identifying what went wrong so that we can fix that and make sure that those risks are managed and those risks are mitigated so that these type of incidents don't happen in the future. And, if you look at the first instance, the educator has now lost her livelihood, like in a day, gone. And we know that what she did was inappropriate. It was in a breach of the legislation. We know all that. But part of the induction process helps you as an educator assess and judge and get a feeling of whether you are registered with the right service. And part of an induction program as the service provider, when you're inducting educators and having that length of time over induction, it really does help you identify attitudes to certain things. It does help you identify practices. So at the end of that 3 months, you may say to an educator, look, sorry, it's just not working out for us. You're not meeting our philosophy, or those sorts of things. And as an educator, you might be with the service and you go, you know what? I'm not really getting the support that I want. I've been asking for support all along and it's not coming, so maybe I'll start looking for a new service provider. So that induction process can help either the service or the educator. The other thing is, and sometimes we can forget coordinators, but coordinators with you guys, you often get the responsibility of implementing that induction program over 3 years. And I know the services that use my policies, we have we have a 3-month induction process in place, and that is an actual learning program. And it starts at, what is the National Quality Framework, and that is unpacked over a couple of weeks. And then we talk about, well, what are the business obligations of the educator? What are the reporting obligations of the educator? And what happens if anything goes wrong? So what are the liabilities that potentially educators are facing if something does go wrong? So when we reviewed and we've gone back over these two particular services that I'm talking about today, I think there is a massive onus on the approved provider in the sense that not all precautions were taken to protect children from harm and hazards. Now, I know many of you know this already. How many families have you worked with over the years? And I've been in Mother's Group when my child was young. I've met many families just through my work. I've met many parents up at the school gate, with my own child, those sorts of things. And I have come across countless parents that will run to the milk bar if the milk bar's just up the road and leave a sleeping baby, or if they're in the same street, they might run up to collect their other children from school and leave a sleeping baby. I know that happens in houses, and we never advocate for that regardless of whether you're a parent or an educator, but we simply cannot do that as an educator. And sometimes the consideration of a parent is, I remember going through a stage with my daughter, and she was about 9 months old, and my milk bar was only 4 doors up the road, and she hadn't been sleeping for a number of weeks properly, and sleep was all over the place, and it was exhausting, and I was frustrated, and there was a whole lot of stuff going on for me as a mum at that time. And I remember thinking to myself, I had to get something for dinner, and I remember thinking to myself, well, if I just ran up the street, surely I'll be gone 5 minutes, and then I'll be back, and then that risk assessment approach came into my head, and I had to cross one little street, and thought, what if the car turns that corner? So no, I didn't do it because I've got that risk assessment process in my head. So this particular educator that did go up to the school and left a child at home alone, maybe when that educator was a parent, was maybe still a parent, but maybe that was a practice that they had as a parent. Maybe that educator had practiced it with their own children, so felt that the risks had been mitigated, and felt that it was probably, the child's going to sleep for an hour. I know I've got an hour, I'm only going to be 5 minutes, what can go wrong? So part of induction would identify any kind of attitude. So often with induction programs, it is also an opportunity to raise scenarios, to raise questions, to have some critical thinking involved, and then the service is able to identify if they've got an educator that does hold an attitude that potentially could be a risk to children, which the initial findings are suggesting that this may be the particular scenario that we're dealing now. With the second scenario, that the approved provider in that case was targeting people who wanted to be a family daycare educator because they were told, you're going to make this money at home, all you have to do is look after children, but there was no real induction in place. So these people that were inducted into this particular service, I feel really bad for them because they're at risk, because they weren't inducted, they weren't told their obligations, they didn't know what they were meant to do. They were I suppose, introduced in a sense to be babysitters. So I do think that there is a gap there for that approved provider, and we can have a look at that, and there's some training, and we will do that. But at this point, we need to let this investigation run its course, and then the regulatory department will make a decision based on the service approval or the approved provider approval, or if there's going to be any sanctions put in place. So it is an ongoing investigation at this stage, and investigations can take a number of months to get through. So I just walk alongside the service provider and make sure that they are improving as best as they can as we go. And then by the time the investigation outcome is either substantiated or not, then hopefully the service provider has fixed any gaps that they need to and can move on. But with you guys, induction for you, number one, it keeps you safe if you know what to expect and whether or not you have been inducted fully, or whether or not the service that you are registered with takes that responsibility really seriously. And that can be an indication if you register with a new service and you're in like that without just qualifications, and you're working with children's screening, but you're not inducted into the philosophy, you're not inducted, you're not engaged in any conversations, there is no follow-up, then you've kind of got to think to yourself as an educator, well, what would that relationship look like long term? And is this the safest place for me? So we know that educators that are inducted, we know that educators that experience continual support, we know that they report higher satisfaction levels. We know that families are more engaged. So we know the importance of induction, and we know the importance of approved providers supporting educators. So it's very obvious what that is. So for you guys, you've got to be really careful about what you're seeing during your induction process. And it's also good to know induction and what induction looks like, and what that means for you, because often many of you will induct your educator assistant, and in many cases that may be your husband, your mother, your sister, somebody who lives in your home. But that doesn't mean because of the personal relationship that you've got there that you don't put a proper induction program in place. So by putting an induction program in place, you're protecting yourself, you're protecting your business, and you're protecting your educator assistant. So induction is really around making sure that everybody's safe and they know what they know. Because sometimes, and I say this all the time, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't have that induction process in place, then your educator assistant won't know what they need to know. And that also goes for residents that are living in your home. If you are a family daycare educator and you've got older children living with you, or adult children, or you might have your family members living with you, or whatever, there is still an induction process to make sure that they are aware that as a family daycare educator, these are our obligations. This is what you can do with the children that are enrolled. This is what you can't do with the children enrolled. If you see this, you need to tell me. You can't be leaving doors open. So whatever that is, there is still an induction program with your educator assistant, and an induction program with the residents that live in your home to keep everybody safe. That's the main purpose of an induction program. And also, if we do end up in an investigation like we are now, you can go back over that program. You can go back over that and say, look, this is what I did. This is what I proved to the approved provider. Or the approved provider can say, this is what I did with the educator, and this is everything that I put in place. And look, we measured it, and we know that the educator knew not to leave that child alone, but it happened. So now what do we do? So that's where the educator has a lot more liability. Anyway, so that's kind of how that works. Now, don't forget, if you've got any questions at all, you can pop them on in here. So that's probably just running through some of my notes that you don't know what you don't know. So I do have a sample induction checklist. I'm not sure where I'll put that for you today, but I do have one available. So if you are interested and I don't put it up on the website or anything, just give me a holler and let me know. But in induction, it's so important that you recognise you're being adequately inducted, and that you recognise, and that as a service, you adequately induct educators. I remember when I started teaching, and I was starting to teach at different universities, and the universities have a robust induction program that goes for a number of months. And an induction program, it's not that hard, actually. It's just really about making sure that meetings or topics or training is in the calendar, it is absolutely delivered, and it's followed up on. So sometimes it's really around setting a schedule rather than just having to remember, oh, I've told this educator that, I've told this educator that, I've told this educator that. So there does need to be some documentation behind your induction program so that you can say, yes, we took every reasonable precaution to make sure that everybody knew their roles, everybody knew their obligations, everybody knew who to report to, everybody knew what to document, and everybody knew how to maintain that documentation. So that's absolutely where we need to start from. And if we plug those gaps during that induction period, whatever that is for you, you'll find that it will be easier in the long run for everybody. Okay. So I've put some additional links here. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because I know that many of you jump on, jump off, jump in, jump out, and there's a load of videos here. If you are new to family daycare and you've just started your working with children, you've just started your Certificate 3 or anything like that, there are 26 videos on this channel that would make up a sound induction program. So start with that one. That would be the governance program for family, the governance video for family daycare educators. Have a look at that. There is the survival guide, particularly if you're brand new and you're trying to get your head around the whole context of everything. I talk about in the videos the survival guide. That's just a way of looking at your home and what that should look like within the regulations, and it gives you a bit of a heads up as to where the liabilities and fines can lie for family daycare educators, which educators in centre-based services, they're not liable to the same fines that you guys are. So that little guidebook will just help you make sure that your home is set up in a way that does meet the regulations as you go. So yeah, always loads of information on here. Feel free to offer any feedback. I think if you make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, I often put some free downloads and different things in there. So that's where I'll put things. So I will see you next Saturday. Hopefully the weather continues to improve. Spring is my favourite time. Happy Father's Day to everybody for tomorrow. We spoke about Father's Day last week, so hopefully that video helped you take some pressure off yourselves as educators. And make sure that Father's Day was enjoyable for all of your children and you. So a happy Father's Day to everybody and enjoy the weekend. I'll talk to you next week. See ya. Bye.